today. My name is Stafford Ocansey, and I'm the Executive Director with the Children's Environmental Literacy Foundation. We call ourselves CEL for short. And I'm so thrilled to be part of this event, getting to share a little bit about my background, kind of my formative experience that led me to know something about environmental literacy, to have a passion for pursuing environmental education and education for sustainability and global citizenship, what we kind of broadly think of under this umbrella of life skills that we're talking about here today. So I'll share a little bit about my background and my journey, the experiences that I was lucky to receive through my own family and my own background in terms of environmental education, as well as some of the formal, minimal, but some formal experiences that I had. Then I'll share a little bit about my work that I've been doing over the past 15 plus years in what can broadly be considered environmental education and education for sustainability. And then a little bit about my vision for the future and what I hope we can all work together to achieve in this area. So one thing that we always say in our work is that if we want children and all people to really care about protecting this shared home of ours, planet Earth, we really need young people to fall in love with nature. And I was really lucky that I had a mom and a grandma who really loved being outside and being out in nature. And so that love affair for me really began early. I grew up in Las Vegas, which of course is famous for being the entertainment capital of the world. But I think lesser known is that it is really a gorgeous desert environment surrounded by mountains. The city is surrounded by mountains in the Mojave Desert landscape. And so I recall my family, we spent Sundays when I was a kid going on day trips to some of the natural wonders around our area. In the spring, we would drive on those lonely desert roads and look at the wildflowers that would pop up and kind of dot the dusty landscape with these beautiful colors. We would go to a place called Valley of Fire that was known for its beautiful sculpted sandstone, and learned about some of the indigenous history of the land there, looking at the petroglyphs that had been kind of carved into sandstone by the Paiute people who lived there for thousands of years before the colonizers arrived. And we would visit the mountains around the city and go moss fishing, that's what we called it, and get dirty in those beautiful wonders of nature. And my mom, she wasn't exactly a woman of faith. We weren't really raised in a religious practice, but she would always say that for her, spending those Sundays out in nature was how she could feel close to God, immersing herself in creation. And so for us, that's kind of how I grew up, whatever spirituality, sense of connectedness that has informed my life's work and my interest in pursuing a more equitable, sustainable future for everyone, I think was really kind of grounded in those experiences of spending those Sunday afternoons going out and exploring nature. So again, I was very lucky that I had a mom who cared about some basic sustainable lifestyle practices like recycling. And I have to give Las Vegas its due, because even back in the early 90s when I was a kid there, we had color-coded bins that the city distributed to each of us for sorting our plastic, glass, and paper, and really instilling that basic sustainable lifestyle practice in me from a young age. But I know that still today, many municipalities in the US and globally still don't offer adequate recycling and other waste management infrastructure to enable that kind of practice that I was lucky to be able to learn about from a young age. And I recall being a first grader, there was a week that I spent every period of my recess picking up trash from our school grounds until every corner of the playground was clean. And each day I recruited a different classmate or two to join me. And when I look back, I kind of see that as maybe my first little community organizing experience when I was, 7 years old or whatever it was at that time. So I think some of where that came from is that I wasn't really learning about those things explicitly in school, but I was lucky that I had a family that my grandma was very civically engaged. I heard stories growing up of her being a civil rights activist back in the 60s and throwing fundraiser parties in her backyard with kissing booths and fortune tellers to raise money for candidates of color that were running in Las Vegas to pursue more equitable policies in the city. She had a colleague, a partner that she would go to apartments that were being put up for rent in Las Vegas. And so her partner was a Black man. He would go in first to inquire about the apartments for rent and be told, oh, it's no longer available. Then a few minutes later, she would come in and then be offered a tour to see the place. So then they would go and report those landlords for their discriminatory practices. So some of that thinking definitely influenced me, even as I was not necessarily getting some of those explicit learning opportunities in school. I think also growing up in Las Vegas during a period of rapid development helped shape my thinking in this. So again, we weren't really talking about this in school, but I could see all around me that these cookie cutter housing developments were going up. You know, we were already in a water stressed environment, and yet a lot of these houses were being bought up by investors from California who weren't actually living in those houses. You know, they were building lots of new golf courses that used tons of water to appease the tourists that were coming in, and you know, not necessarily concerned about the long-term well-being of a city that they don't live in. New streets were being built, super wide streets, wider than anything I've seen living here on the East Coast where I live now, for cars, but there was no public transportation infrastructure being developed. And one of the places we used to go to a lot as a kid was Lake Mead, which is home to the country's tallest dam, Hoover Dam, that provides electricity for many parts of Southern California and Arizona, as well as Nevada. And you would see this white ring around the top of the water on the mountains that surround the lake. And every year that ring would get wider and wider as the water level would drop. And still today, it's the lowest it's ever been. And yet this development continues. And, you know, the drought issues are going to get worse and worse. So there's a impending water crisis in Las Vegas that is something that I witnessed all growing up and really informed. I didn't necessarily have the words for it back then, but something was not right. You know, the way we were developing, the way we were planning the city growth was not in line with what the ecological capacity and constraints of the community were. So beyond these experiences with my family and my observations as a nature lover, some other opportunities that I had, not necessarily in formal schooling, but were with my experience as a Girl Scout. So, you know, with the Girl Scouts, we would go on hikes and we would learn about the local flora and fauna. We would learn how to build a fire and cook food over it. We did some camping trips with the Girl Scouts. We learned how to build things out of found objects. We learned about the importance of caring for each other and empathy. And so those were things that I did in elementary school. Another kind of sustainability umbrella lesson I remember was in gifted and talented class, which again was not part of the core curriculum, but a select few students were pulled out of class to get these, you know, kind of sustainability, global citizenship type lessons. And I was one of those lucky few. We were asked to write to our embassy and learn about another country that way. So I remember I chose South Africa, and I remember getting the big packet of booklets in the mail and admiring the photos of Table Mountain on the cover. And I still haven't been to visit South Africa, but I do hope to one day. So again, those were some few examples that I had in my formal schooling in elementary school, but most of them were not in the core curriculum. You know, they were kind of extracurricular experiences. And then when I got to middle high school, there really wasn't any experience. You know, the formative experiences that I had were those that I was lucky to receive from the family I had, who happened to be interested in some of these sustainable lifestyle practices. But I do remember one civic education lesson that really stuck with me in high school in my government class. Our teacher he set up this project where the AP government class was the Senate, the honors class was the House of Representatives, and then our teacher was the Supreme Court. And so every student had to come up with 2 ideas, propose 2 bills, and then our class would debate them, vote on them. A few would then go to the other class and vote on it, and then a few made it past our teacher, who was the Supreme Court, to determine the constitutionality of these ideas we were proposing. And so that was something that kind of got me interested in civic engagement through my formal schooling experience that supplemented what I already was learning from my own family. And I think through some of my classmates who were also getting interested in civic engagement during that time, we started to volunteer with, we would go down to the courthouse once a week. And as newly naturalized citizens were coming down the elevator after their naturalization ceremonies, we would register them to vote. So that was an experience that I think a friend recruited me from high school, a friend who was really interested in politics. But looking back on it, you know, I feel like that was an experience of inclusivity and civic engagement, and making sure that all folks who are in our country in the US have a voice in the decisions that are being made on our behalf by our decision makers. So I really, look back on that as one of my formative experiences as well. And so, looking back, while I may not have had the language back then, I see how these formative experiences really did begin to shape my worldview that understands what I now refer to as sustainability and environmental literacy as being about our ability to thrive together as full human beings within systems that are shaped by everyone's participation and everyone's contributions, and which intentionally address past and current injustices and inequities in ways that are informed by those who have experienced injustice and inequity directly. So that's just a little bit about my background and kind of my formal schooling experience. I was lucky that I had a family who cared about some of these things, and I did have a few of what I would call environmental education, sustainability education, global citizenship education experiences in elementary school and a little bit in high school, but really it was very minimal, and it wasn't done in a way that was infused directly in the core curriculum that every child receives. So there really were a lot of gaps that have informed the work I've done up till now and what I will continue to do to change that. So when I got to college, that's kind of when I started thinking about what really is the future career I want to pursue. And I knew I wanted to do something that infused my love of the arts. I was always a musician and a storyteller growing up. And I also knew I wanted to have some kind of positive impact on the world. So I studied cinema, television, and international relations at the University of Southern California in Los Angeles. And that was kind of when I first had a reckoning with sort of my class position, because when I got to the university, USC is the acronym, and a lot of people called it the University of Spoiled Children. that was kind of the nickname that the university had. And indeed, there were a lot of folks from more, wealthier backgrounds, and I really didn't have a context for that until I got there. But I did grow up in Las Vegas. I was the child of two parents who waited tables for a living in the hotels there and didn't go to college. So I started to sort of have a working class identity that took shape kind of through that experience. And always had to work part-time throughout college to kind of help supplement, the expense of attending higher education. So as one of those summer jobs one year, I canvassed for a nonprofit called Environment California, and I went door to door raising money for the organization. And at that time, we were working to pass the California Million Solar Roofs bill. And later, I ended up getting to stand behind Governor Schwarzenegger, who was the governor at that time, with my teammates and colleagues when he signed that bill into law. And I love that work so much that when senior year started, I helped launch a chapter of the organization on my campus. And we put on a hybrid car show, and we were able to convince the university to transition their vehicle fleet to hybrids, which, this was in the early 2000s. So electric cars weren't really a thing then. Hybrids was the big innovation. So when I graduated, I took a job with that organization as a campus organizer. And that was the beginning of my career in what I now call environmental education. And in that sense, we were really out there organizing, mobilizing college students to lead campaigns on state climate policies, such as in California at that time, we were pushing for the nation's first cap and trade policy and really promoting youth for voter turnout. So I worked for the organization in Los Angeles during the 2008 election when Obama was running for his first term, and we helped organize over 20,000 young people across UCLA and the Los Angeles Community College District campuses to vote. And so especially that work we did in the community colleges was really important, because these were mostly Black and Brown students, folks who were first generation college students, folks who hadn't always been involved in the voting process that we were helping get into the voting process. And I think that really was part of the larger trend that we saw back in 2008 of the record voter turnout that helped usher Obama into office. So that was, an exciting beginning to my career, really grounding myself with those community organizing skills that I think are so key to what we call sustainability education, because really it's all about having a voice in the decision-making process and making sure that everyone has a voice in that process, whether they're young, old, all different races, all different backgrounds. So with that experience, I was really grateful for getting that grounding in community organizing and grassroots leadership. But I did become increasingly frustrated with what I viewed as a narrow approach to environmental activism. The organization really was not open to suggestions among staff to take a more justice-oriented approach, a more intersectional approach. And as I looked around at the hundreds of staff that the organization had around the country, I did see that it was a very white organization. And I realized that I wanted to channel my organizing work in a different, more inclusive direction. So after leaving that job, I spent a year as an organizer with the Los Angeles County Arts Commission's nonprofit partner called Arts for LA. And we ran an initiative to organize parents, teachers, artists, and community leaders in school districts across LA County, advocating for K-12 arts education curriculum across subjects. So maybe it seems a little strange to go from environmental work to arts, but in my mind, they're all related because the arts and music are such powerful tools for expression, for healing for young people, and for helping to kind of pull on the heartstrings to really get folks to see a different perspective and to be inspired to take action on issues that artists and, however folks are expressing themselves, what are those issues that they care about? So with that work, it was a tough budget year, and we helped save dozens of arts and music teaching positions from the chopping block and helped start new arts programs in low-income neighborhood schools. And I think that helped kind of crystallize both those connections that I see between the role of the arts in sustainability and in global citizenship, as well as kind of looking at the work I had done so far in community organizing, being around institutions of education, and thinking how do communities influence and inform how our institutions of education are meeting our needs, are being responsive to the vision that we want to see for our communities. And so based on that interest, I moved across the country to New York to pursue my master's degree at Teachers College, Columbia University, studying comparative and international education. And that really set me on the course that I've been on since then. I worked for 10 years at the Earth Institute at Columbia University, and we worked on a whole range of education programs spanning the lifelong learning spectrum. And I was immensely privileged to be able to travel to different parts of the world and exchange ideas with teachers, parents, researchers, and field experts who had vastly different life experiences than mine. One of the programs that I helped lead was called the Connect to Learn Initiative. It was a girls' scholarship program, and we worked in 10 African countries. And Myanmar, we supported over 1,300 girls on completing their secondary education with scholarships. We helped equip their rural remote schools with technology tools and connectivity, and provided their teachers with training and tools to help leverage those resources. And we would help connect schools, facilitating cross-cultural exchange. So we had students in the US meeting together. This was way pre-pandemic, before everyone else was using Zoom as well. We were using Skype back then, but connecting classrooms from different parts of the world in this cross-cultural learning and trying to flip things on their head, right? A lot of times in this work, there's this kind of assumption that folks in the West or folks in the global North have something to teach folks in the global South. And we would do it the other way around. We had one exchange where we had a class in Rwanda talking with a class in New York City, talking about the single-use plastic ban that Rwanda has been running for about 20 years now, and kind of talking about what did those lifestyle shifts look like for them and their families, so that how can we learn from them here in New York about ways we can reduce our use of single-use plastics. So that was really an amazing experience. We also worked with local NGOs in the countries where we were working to train young women who lacked formal education to learn skills for eco-friendly livelihoods. So in Ghana, we ran a project with a group called Youth and Women Empowerment to learn tailoring skills, and they would use upcycled plastic waste to create different waterproof products that were very marketable in the local community. So they made shower curtains, baby bibs, lunch boxes, school pencil cases, placemats, and things like this that were all waterproofed with this upcycled plastic. So they're addressing a mismanaged waste problem in a community that really lacked waste infrastructure. And then also building skills to earn income, which had been a struggle for many of these women prior to that. And it's still a struggle, but it's a step in a different direction. And then alongside that, learning skills for advocacy. So while they're kind of making these products with upcycled waste as sort of a short-term solution, they're also working with their district assembly to advocate for investment in waste management infrastructure in their community. So kind of looking at the long-term solution and the short-term and the long-term solution there. And when you think about the Sustainable Development Goal framework, we were really tackling several of the Sustainable Development Goal areas as well in that project, looking at women's equality, sustainable livelihoods, access to education, lifelong learning opportunities, sustainable production and consumption, climate action. So all these kind of things were touched on by this project that we were working on there. We also ran early grade literacy programs in local languages, which, a lot of education policies around the world are so focused on teaching the colonial languages, but not the mother tongue that young people grow up in. And without that foundation of learning in the early years, it really can inhibit literacy learning throughout the learning experience that many young people go through. And then that leads to inequities in those life outcomes. So promoting local language literacy learning in the early years, especially if students are able to learn how to read in their local language, those decoding skills will then translate to learning, English or French or whatever the colonial language is, and enable more successful learning across subjects from then on. So we really did a lot of work in that area as well, in places like Telangana, India, and Burundi, working with the departments of education there to take this neuroscience-based local language literacy approach. But then as we were doing all this international work, our team realized that here in the US, we were really failing to adequately integrate sustainability education opportunities. So we started to focus more on local programs. And this was really accelerated at the start of the pandemic, when we were grounded from traveling, and we were really, the connection between environmental degradation, public health, racial and economic inequity, access to healthy communities and healthcare were made more clear than ever. And so we started doing community organizing workshops. We started running programs to help build young people's data analysis and storytelling skills to help them more effectively advocate for the sustainability solutions that they wanted to see in their school communities. And our guiding framework for that work was the Sustainable Development Goal Agenda, specifically Target 4.7. So Target 4 of the Sustainable Development Goals is the education goal, focused on ensuring inclusive and equitable quality education and lifelong learning opportunities for all. And then that Target 4.7 is really the one that touches on this work of education for sustainability, which is about learners acquiring knowledge and skills to promote sustainable development. And that includes sustainability education, sustainable lifestyles, human rights education, gender equality, promotion of a culture of peace and nonviolence, and global citizenship. So I had an amazing experience during those 10 years working at Columbia. I worked with incredible people around the world. And personally, it was a big transitional period for me in my life. I got married, I had 2 children and became a mom. And I feel like the organization really embodied what this work of sustainability is about in terms of promoting well-being and supporting each other in both our work lives and our personal lives. And so it was really a great job to have during that period of becoming a mom and needing that flexibility. But after 10 years, I was ready to take on more leadership and wanted to focus more explicitly on work in the US. And so I was so grateful to be chosen as the new executive director of the Children's Environmental Literacy Foundation, where I am now and where I've been since just January of this year. And I'm the first new executive director there since our founder, Katie Ginsburg, launched the organization back in 2003. And she led it for those first nearly 20 years. And so I really see the work we do itself as an extension of what I've always been doing. And our mission itself is about making sustainability an integral part of every child's K-12 learning experience. And the way we do that is by working with teachers, because we think if we can equip teachers with the skills they need in the lens of how to bring sustainability into core curriculum, that's really going to translate into changing our school systems. It's going to reach out then to all the students that those teachers touch year over year. So we see that multiplier effect. If we work directly with teachers, they're going to scale that to all their students. They're going to come into their institutions where they work, and they're really going to kind of change the mentality and bring this systems thinking, this critical thinking, this problem-based, place-based approach to learning that we focus on itself into their classrooms and their education institutions. So we do that through it. We have summer institute programs where teachers come and over a period of a few days, build that community of practice with other like-minded educators, get inspired by speeches and talks from experts in the field, and then most importantly, work together to come up with project plans and lesson plans that they can then take back to their schools to implement sustainability concepts into their core curriculum. And some of how that looks, we also have a civic science program that's a little more step-by-step process for middle and high school teachers to guide students through observing those problems they see in their community, those issues of environmental and social injustice. Figure out what kind of data do they need to collect to better understand that issue. How do you analyze that data? Then how do you take that data and design solutions based on what you found that are going to meet the needs of the community and be something that can translate into concrete policy solutions. And so those events culminate in what we call our student symposium, where students come together, they present on their findings, on their ideas to a panel of experts and local decision makers that we bring together to kind of provide those students with guidance on what those next steps might look like. And some of the issues that students have looked at that I think really sort of encapsulate this systems thinking idea and looking across how do we bring the subjects together in an interdisciplinary way to tackle these big problems that students see in their communities. One issue that students have worked on is looking at air pollution. So we have a partnership where students get equipped with air quality monitoring devices, and they can look at the particulate matter levels in their communities. And so during the pandemic, we saw, of course, that some teachers were, they weren't in the classroom with their students, they were based somewhere else. So we had a teacher who was based out on Long Island, New York, supporting her students over Zoom who were based in this area of the Bronx known as, what's it called? Cancer Alley or Asthma Alley. I'm forgetting off the top of my head right now. But the point is that it's a Black and brown community with extremely high rates of asthma. In New York City, 4% of white children have asthma, over 20% of Black children have asthma. So there's huge inequities in this. And these were the kind of issues that students were starting to dig into through this project, where they were seeing that their teacher based out in a part of Long Island with lots of green space had very low levels of particulate matter in her community. They had unacceptably high levels of particulate matter that they're breathing in because they lived in a manufacturing area. And of course, that then leads them to a process of questioning why are all these manufacturing centers here where we live? And you get into zoning practices that are rooted in racism and discrimination. And so these are the kind of projects that students, they start with that question of why do we have so much asthma in our community? They collect the data, and that data leads them on a path of inquiry to kind of dig into those historical and policy roots of some of these issues that we look at. And then they come to our student symposium, they share what they're learning about, and they really get empowered to be a voice for change in these issues. So we're really about breaking down those subject area silos. Of course, we know that teachers are dealing with so much, especially these past couple of years. But that's why we think if we bring the sustainability lens, it's a way to energize teachers to kind of take their core curriculum and bring it beyond the textbook, using the community as a laboratory for learning, bringing in these issues that teachers and students care about. And kind of, if the origination of formal education, and even before that, the disciplines, it really came from human curiosity, looking out there in the world and asking questions, wondering why things are the way they are. And then they got kind of narrowed down into these disciplines to figure out, okay, this is how we can teach this stuff. But now we want to kind of bring them back together so that we take a big issue and have that kind of guide the learning that happens in these different subject areas, so that the skills that come from each subject area kind of bring this holistic approach to tackling a problem. So if we're looking at this issue of air pollution, maybe you start in science class by collecting that data and understanding what is particulate matter. Then you get into math class to analyze that data. Now you're thinking about what are some of the solutions we want to see. So in English and language arts, we can write a piece about a persuasive essay about why this issue matters. In social studies, we can look at some of those historical policy decisions that were made that led to some of this inequity in air pollution. And then in art class, we can make a documentary, or we can make a poster that helps share with our classmates in our communities what's going on and what can be done about it. So that's sort of what we try to do with Self, is we try to pursue these issues in ways that are interdisciplinary. And, I think a long time environmental education has been sort of pigeonholed in the sciences. And we want to make it clear that this issue there's room for it, and it's imperative that it be a guiding approach to all of the disciplines, so that we're not just learning for learning's sake, but we're learning so that we can take action to build a more beautiful, equitable, sustainable, regenerative future for everyone. And I think this is also really important for well-being. We've really seen that young people over the past few years especially have huge rates of anxiety and depression. And of course, that's because of the experience of the pandemic, but it's also because of fears about climate change and environmental degradation that we're seeing, and legacies of racism that are still impacting communities. And so taking action is really a balm to address those anxieties. And our approach is really bringing this action-oriented way of learning into classrooms and helping teachers understand how can they help facilitate some of these processes with students. So that's what our work itself is about. And in my role, my vision is really for us to continue pursuing and supporting this transformation of education systems by equipping teachers, school leaders, community members, and learners of all ages with the knowledge, competencies, values, and skills, and the agency that we need for current and future generations to achieve the goals outlined in the Sustainable Development Goal Agenda and the Paris Climate Agreement, to recognize and address injustices that they see in their communities, to be equipped with tools and skills for creative expression and innovation, to recognize when they need support, and to feel empowered to prioritize their own well-being, when oftentimes our cultural demands would rather see them burn out for the sake of economic gain. We want students to feel empowered to question some of these big assumptions that drive our economic and cultural models toward a path of greater well-being for everyone, and for greater health and sustainability of our shared home here on planet Earth. So that's what I hope to see going forward. And I hope to work with everyone here in helping to make that happen. Itself, we've done a lot of work in the US, but now we are branching out to kind of pull on some of the international relationships that I've cultivated over the years to bring more of this cross-cultural learning and problem solving that students can engage with through our programs. And so we're always looking for partners and always looking to meet other folks who are interested in this work. So please reach out. My email is tara@selfeducation.org. That's CELF education.org. And I hope to work with you in building this future that we want to see.